Hey learners, welcome to Ahmad Coaching and I'm your teacher Dr. Anna. Today we are going to study about adaptations in plants to low and high temperature. Plants, they have evolved an extraordinary range of adaptations to survive in environments with extreme temperatures. When we talk about extreme temperature, it means that we are talking about two different peaks of the thermometer. For example, from the low temperature of alpine and arctic regions to the high temperatures of deserts and tropical landscape. The plants, they have developed structural, physiological, biochemical and behavioral adaptations which are crucial for maintaining their functions and ensuring the survival. The question is what the low and high temperatures they are going to do, why they need to adapt. We know that body temperature needs to be maintained so that the enzymes they can perform their functions. And enzymes are the most important thing in the body of plant which are involved in performing different kind of pathways. For example, photosynthesis, respiration and all other pathways which are taking place in the plants, they are controlled by enzymes. Enzymes, they work on optimum temperature. So if the temperature for the enzymes increases, they will denature, and if the temperature will decreases, they will slow down and will not perform their function. It means if the enzymes they are not performing their functions, all the metabolic pathways inside our body they are going to halt. So it's very important to maintain the temperature. That is why the plants they have different adaptations so that they can survive the high and low temperature and still their metabolic reactions are going on. Let's talk about the adaptations in plants to low and high temperature one by one. Starting with the adaptations in plants to low temperature. There are 4 different types of adaptations which plants have done to cope with low temperature. One is structural, physiological, biochemical, and behavioral. First of all, let's talk about structural adaptations. When we talk about structural adaptations, it means that plants they have changed their structure that we can see with our eyes. For example, the first adaptation which they have done to cope with the low temperature includes leaf modification. In the leaf modification, some plants they have needle-like leaves which reduces the surface area, that is so to minimize the water loss and prevent the frost damage. For example, conifers. So these are the plants conifers, and you can see the leaf structure is not the normal we see. It's like a needle-like structure, and this needle-like structure is helping them to reduce the surface area, so water loss is reduced as well as frost damage is reduced. The other type of leaf modification includes thicker leaves. Here you can see in the succulent plants here, their leaves are very thick. And the purpose of this thick leaf is to retain heat and reduce water loss. Because the leaves they are thick, so it takes a lot of time to heat to move from one part to another part and then to go out of the plant body. As well as water loss, it can also be reduced because of this thick leaf. The second structural adaptation includes hairs and trichomes. The plants they trap a layer of air through the hairs and trichomes so that they can provide the insulation and reduce the heat loss. So here you can see these are the trichomes and hair-like structure. Mostly they are present in the cushion plants. Here the hairs are working the same way they work in case of animals. In the animals, the hair they are actually acting as a covering so they can trap the air, and that air is going to act as an insulator, and because of this they can bear the low temperature. So similar function hair and trichomes are providing in case of plant. The other structural modification of plants includes deep root system. Plants they extend their roots deeper into the ground where the temperature are more stable, allowing them to access unfrozen water during the winter. In this case, alfalfa is the plant example of a plant which has a deep root system so that they can move their roots so deep into the water that they can access the water which is not frozen, which is not very cold, and they can survive the winter in this way. The second adaptation of plants to cope with low temperature includes physiological adaptations. In case of physiological adaptation, the first one is dormancy. In case of dormancy, the plants they slow down their metabolic activities during the winters, and this state is called as dormancy. The purpose of reducing the metabolic activity is to conserve the energy and protection against frost damage. This kind of activity can be observed in maple trees. Here you can see the maple tree. It has formed this bird-like structure showing that this plant has gone into dormancy period. The second physiological adaptation is antifreeze protein. As the name indicates, these proteins they are going to inhibit ice crystal formation within the cell so that they can lower the freezing point of the cellular fluid. So these proteins they are present in the cell like this, and because of their presence the freezing point of the cell sap it decreases. For example, first it was going to freeze at, for example, -1 temperature. Now it's going to decrease to -2. So in this way the plant is going to survive -1 and -2 temperature, which otherwise was difficult. This kind of behavior is observed in winter rye and cabbage. The third physiological adaptation includes solute accumulation. Plants they accumulate solutes, which are sugars, amino acids, and other osmoprotectants to lower the freezing point of their cell sap, thus preventing the ice formation. Again, the plants they are going to increase the concentration of sugars, amino acids, and osmoprotectants inside their cells so that they can reduce the freezing point, and in this way they are going to protect their cell sap from ice formation. This kind of behavior is observed in sugar beets. Another important physiological adaptation of plants to low temperature is altered membrane lipids. We know that the membrane it includes lipids. It's a lipid bilayer. To cope with the low temperature, the plants they adjust the composition of their cell membrane lipids. It means that they are going to change the lipid which should be present in the bilayer. In this way, they are going to increase the unsaturated fatty acids. Unsaturated fatty acids are the fatty acids which contains double bond or triple bonds, and they are difficult to freeze. For example, if you see oil they are unsaturated fatty acids, and you can see that even you put the oil in the freezer they will not freeze. Because of this property, the plants they increases the unsaturated fatty acids in their membrane so that they can maintain their fluidity at the low temperature. The example of this plant includes winter wheat. The third adaptation includes biochemical adaptations. In case of biochemical adaptation, we have cryoprotectants. Cryo word means that low temperature. They are going to change their biochemistry so that they can prevent or protect themselves from freezing. They synthesize cryoprotective components such as proline, glycine betaine, and certain sugars that protect cellular structures and proteins from freezing damage. For example, in case of spinach, this is the internal structure of spinach, and all these dots they indicates the cryoprotectants, and we can see it has a large amount of these cryoprotectants so that it can survive the low temperature. The second biochemical adaptation is called acclimation. The plants they undergo physiological and biochemical changes in response to gradually decreasing temperature, thus enhancing their cold tolerance. So instead of a sudden drop in temperature, if the temperature is decreasing slowly, the plants they will undergo the biochemical changes. For example, they can enhance the cryoprotectants, they can enhance the antiproteins, they can change their lipid composition in the cell membrane so that they can survive the cold temperature, and this process is known as cold acclimation, or to adapt to cold temperature very slowly. The last adaptation is behavioral adaptation. In the case of behavioral, we have deciduous habit, which is that the plants they shed their leaves before the onset of winter so that they can reduce the water loss as well as avoid the damage from the snow and ice accumulation. If there are leaves, it means that snow is gonna land on the leaves, and this can damage the plant. It can also lower the temperature of the plants. So to avoid this, they just shed their leaves so that the surface area is reduced. There is no place for the snow to land, and in this way they can reduce the snow damage. The example includes oak tree. Another behavioral adaptation of the plants to low temperature includes snow cover utilization. In this case, they use the snow as an insulating layer that maintains a stable temperature around them, thus protecting them against cold temperature. If you know igloos, what are igloos? That they are made up of ice. All the structure is made up of ice, and if you go inside these igloos, instead of feeling cold, you will feel warm, because here the ice covering is actually acting as an insulator. So this phenomena is also utilized by the plants so that they can maintain their temperature and protect themselves from extreme cold. The example includes Arctic willow. So in conclusion, the plants, they are adapted to low temperature by performing structural, physiological, biochemical and behavioral adaptations, in which they modify their leaves from needle-like leaves to thick leaves, as well as they have hairs to trap the air, which act as the insulator. They have deep root systems so they can reach to the warm water and can adapt to cold temperature. They undergo dormancy period and slow down their metabolic activities. They increase the antifreeze proteins in their cell sap, as well as they increase the fluid accumulation in the cell sap so that they can reduce the freezing temperature of their cell fluids. Along with this, they alter the membrane structure. The lipid content of the cell membrane is changed from saturated to unsaturated so that they can maintain their fluidity. They also increase their cryoprotectant, as well as they gradually increase different compounds in their cell through cold accumulation process. And in case of behavioral adaptations, they shed their leaves and they cover themselves with the snow, which act as an insulator. So all these are the methods or the adaptations in plants to cope with the low temperature. Now let's talk about the high temperature, how plants, they are going to adapt themselves to cope with the high temperature. Again, we have structural, physiological, biochemical, behavioral and anatomical adaptations. Starting with structural adaptations, plants, they modify their leaves if they wanted to adapt to high temperature. In case of high temperature, they have slow and narrow leaves so that they can reduce the surface area which is exposed to the sunlight and minimize the water loss. For example, in case of olive trees, here you can see the olive trees, they have narrow leaves so that the water loss is reduced and the amount of light entering or striking the leaves is very small. Another leaf adaptation includes thick waxy cuticle on their leaves and stems. The plants, they have thick waxy cuticle on their leaves and stems so that they can reduce the water loss through evaporation, which is in this case of aloe vera, which has cuticle, and this cuticle is not allowing the water to evaporate easily. Then comes the vertically oriented leaves. The vertically oriented leaves, they are going to reduce the direct exposure to the sunlight, thus minimize the water loss, which happens in case of grasses. Here you can see they are vertically means that almost at 90 angle. They are not horizontal, but they are vertical. And in this way, the exposure to sunlight is reduced. And as the exposure to sunlight is reduced, it means that water loss is reduced. Another structural adaptation includes reflective surface. Reflective surface means that the light will strike and then reflect back. Instead of going inside, it will just strike and then will go back. Some desert plants, they have leaves with reflective surfaces to reduce the heat absorption, and as the heat is not absorbed, it means the body temperature of the plants, it will not increase. This kind of phenomena has been observed in silverleaf nightshades. Here you can see they have the reflective surface, so light will come, strike, and then it will go back instead of going inside the plant. The similar thing happens when you are wearing black color. In the summer, the black color has the capacity to absorb maximum heat or light. So when you are wearing the black color, it means that you are going to feel very hot, very warm, because the black color is absorbing all the heat or all the light which is striking to them. If you switch from black to white color, the white color has the capacity to reflect back all the light. What will happen that you will feel cool. Why? Because all the light which is striking on the white color, it will reflect back. So similar thing is happening in the case of reflective surfaces. Then comes the physiological adaptations. In case of physiological adaptations, we have stomatal regulations. We know the stomata, it performs the function in the entrance and exit of gases from the leaf. So what they do, that they open the stomata at night so that they can reduce the water loss. So during the day, the stomatas, they are closed, and as the opening is closed, no water can go out, but they open this during the night so that they can reduce the water loss. For example, in cactus. Along with this, they have efficient stomatal control. Many drought resistant plants, they can rapidly open and close their stomata to minimize the water loss. They just open it very quickly and perform their function and close it very quickly so that the water loss, it can be minimized. Another physiological adaptation is root system. They have tap roots. Plants, they develop deep tap roots to access water stored deep underground. These are the tap roots. The main roots, they are known as tap roots, and they go so deep into the water, into the soil, so that they can get as much underground water as possible. Along with this, another adaptation is extensive root network. The grasses, they have extensive shallow root system that quickly absorb water from the brief rainfall. So in this case, they have shallow system. It's not very deep, but it's extensive. Here you can see. And the purpose of this extensive root system is that as there is a small rainfall, so these roots, they are going to quickly absorb the water from the rainfall and will use the water to reduce their body temperature. Another adaptation in plants to high temperature is biochemical adaptations, in which they have heat shock protein. The heat shock proteins in plants like tomatoes, they help them protect cellular structures and enzymes from the heat damage. As the name indicates, they are heat shock, that they are going to protect the plant from the heat. Another biochemical adaptation includes accumulation of compatible solute. The plants such as sorghum and barley, they accumulate compatible solutes like proline, glycine, betaine, and sugars to protect cellular functions during heat stress. Then comes the behavioral structure, which includes leaf shedding. During the dry season, to reduce water loss and avoid heat stress, plants, they shed their leaves. As the leaves, they are no more there, it means the surface area on which the light was going to strike is reduced, and as the amount of light striking to the plant is reduced, it means that heat absorption is also reduced. Another behavioral adaptation includes leaf rolling or folding. Many grasses, they roll or fold their leaves to reduce the surface area and water loss during the heat. Here we can see they have rolled their leaves so that the surface area is reduced and the amount of heat striking is reduced as well. Another adaptation includes anatomical adaptation, in which they have sunken stomatas. The plants, they have stomata located in sunken pits, which helps in reducing the water loss by minimizing the exposure to dry air. Normally we have seen the stomatas, they are present at this point here. But in plants who wants to reduce the water loss and residing in very hot environments, they have the stomatas in the pits or sunken pits, which are away from the lower epidermis. and in this way the water loss through the stomata is reduced. Another anatomical adaptation includes thick bark. The trees like cork, oak have thick insulating bark. Here you can see. This bark is going to protect them against heat and also reduce their water losses. So in summary, the plants, they have different adaptations to cope with the high temperature. They have modified their leaves into small and narrow leaves as well as thick waxy cuticles so that they prevent the water loss. They have vertically oriented leaves as well as they have reflective surfaces so that they can reflect back maximum amount of light hitting on their surfaces. They regulate their stomata and open them at night, as well as they open them and close them very quickly and very rapidly to minimize the water loss. They have tap roots to go to the deep underground water, as well as they have extensive shallow root systems so that they can absorb maximum amount of water during rainfall. They have heat shock proteins to prevent them from heat damage, as well as they have accumulated some other compatible solutes to prevent them from heat stress. They shed their leaves during hot weather to reduce the surface area, as well as they roll and fold their leaves to perform the same function. They have sunken stomata so that they can prevent the water loss through stomata, and as well as they have thick barks to provide a protective covering against heat and to reduce the water loss. So that was our lesson on adaptations in plants to low and high temperature. If you have any question related to this topic, you can ask me in the comment section, and you can also suggest some topics you wanted to learn in the comment section. I will see you in the next video.